The time and location of this meeting and all meetings of this body are posted in City Hall, 78 Bayard Street, New Brunswick. Roll call, please, Mr. Chairman. Here. Dr. Johnson, will you lead us in the flag salute? A reminder, the next monthly Board of Education meeting will be held on Tuesday, April 17, 2018, beginning at 7:00 p.m. and will be held at the New Brunswick High School in the auditorium 1000 Somerset Street. We will move to item number 1, the 2018-19 budget presentation by Mr. Janero.
Thank you, Dr. Caldwell. So the board and the public has in front of them a packet that I'm going to review. I'm going to skip over to the revenues. So the budget that you have in front of you today is $214 million total that includes grants. And that is an increase of approximately $3.2 million from this year's budget. So then the increase comes from an increase in state aid and an increase in budgeted fund balance. And then we also had some decreases in revenue, some miscellaneous revenues. So the next tab is the appropriations. That appropriations lays out every line item in the budget where money needs to be spent. But what we've done is I've given you, if you go to the tab that's breakdown of costs, that really outlines exactly where the money is being spent. So although the whole budget is $214 million, this 2017-18 breakdown of budgeted cost is $194 million. And I've given you that because that is only the general fund budget and the early childhood budget. The rest of the monies are federal grants that really aren't appropriate to be included in these numbers. So as you can see, salaries and benefits are 63% of this year's budget. I will point out to you that the charter schools is 3% of this year's budget at $5.8 million. And you can see the rest of the costs as they break out within the breakdown of budgeted costs. If you go to the 18-19 budget, it is $206 million. Salaries and benefits are $129 million. Early childhood is $22 million. I will tell you that out of that $22 million in early childhood is also salaries and benefits for the early childhood staff, but I leave early childhood separate so you get an idea of what it costs to educate those approximately 1,400 pre-kindergarten children that are not only in district but in the outside providers. As you can see, charter schools in the 18-19 budget is $8.3 million, which is now 4% of our budget. But that is approximately a 43% increase in the amount of money that we have to send to charter schools. Okay, so if you go to the next tab, the increase and decrease of budgeted costs. So for the pre-kindergarten budget and general fund budget, it's an increase to $12 million. You can see the salary and benefits increase. Most of that is driven by health benefits, which we estimate to increase anywhere from 10 to 12%. The state health benefit this year increase is 13%. So we do expect to be below that due to our self-insured plan. You can see the early childhood budget actually decreased due to those enrollments that are decreasing slightly. And you can see the biggest increase is the charter schools for $2.5 million. And last but certainly not least, the biggest point to point out tonight is the estimated tax impact on the taxpayers of the city of New Brunswick. So we have recommended a 1.66% increase to the tax levy, which would equate to $78.85 a year for the average home assessed at $269,590. So for less than $7 a month is the tax increase that we're recommending. So it's about 1.5 trips to Starbucks maybe, or maybe 1 trip, and that's what we're requesting. So I believe that this is a fair budget. It meets our thorough and efficient education, and I propose this budget for your approval of the budget and the tax levy to be included in that budget, to be voted on April 17th.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any questions from the board? I'll ask one. I think it's nicely laid out. The charter school increase is pretty significant. Is there any chance that that could be lower or higher? Any potential change in that?
It could be lower or higher. So that is an increase of approximately it's about 204 children more. So an increase of 200 children is an extra $2.5 million since they get 90% of the state aid. So we don't know sitting here today whether those 200 children will actually be in seats. So they will take their enrollments on October 15th. Before that, I will be in contact with them to get their enrollment numbers. And if the charter school numbers aren't there, then that is monies that we do not have to spend on the charter schools.
And so I also see the 63% of the budget are salaries and administration. And so, salaries and benefits. So I think a lot of people, the public doesn't realize how significant that is. That much of our budget is, we don't have a lot of leeway because of, you want to say something about that? Just to do.
Yeah, and that number actually is low because in this budgeted breakdown of budgeted cost, if you take out the early childhood pre-K program and you look at our K through 12 education budget, right? So let's take the 23 million from 194 million. So let's say that's 171 million dollars, right? So our general fund budget this year is 171 million, of which call it 123 million is salaries and benefits. So the way I've laid it out for you, it actually is giving you a lower number, I would say. So what's 122 of 171? So that's about, so you're talking, it's easily 80%, right? 20% of 171 would be 34 million. So you're at about 75 to 80% salaries and benefits. Then, of course, if you add in the money that's required to spend on charter schools, there's another 6 million. Transportation is 7 million, right? Gas and heat, that's 3 million. You have added district tuitions. So if you really break down this $194 million, the amount of money that you have that's really not fixed cost, it's about $7 million that you have in terms of supplies, professional development, and then those costs. So much of this is fixed costs that drive this budget that you're really, the only way you can cut costs is cut in those areas, which is often very difficult.
And I think that's a very, very important point, because if you see this kind of budget, you think, oh, they have money to play with, and we don't. You know, and you talk about maintenance and other things. So any other questions? No? Do I hear a motion to, I guess we'll vote. We'll take a motion to accept this.
Sure.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, roll call, Mr. Chairman.
Mrs. Sadowski.
What about, you presented the budget, what about number 2 on the agenda? Open questions.
Yeah, that's correct. So we have a motion and a second. We should hold that and then hear any open questions from the public before we take the vote.
Okay, item number 2, open questions from the public. Are there any questions? Say your name and address.
Good evening, members of the board. Charles Cradaville. I live in New Brunswick. I'm the editor of New Brunswick Today, as you know. I wanted to ask a little bit about the impact of charter schools on the budget. First of all, the board, I believe, has retained an attorney to oppose or challenge one of the charter schools that was approved about a year and a half ago. Can I just get an update on that? Has that been successful? Has that been a good use of the resources?
Does anyone want to provide an update, George?
That's still pending in the appellate division, so there's been no ruling by the appellate courts on the State Department of Education's grant of that application, but since it wasn't granted and Governor Murphy's put a freeze on it, I think we look pretty good no matter how the appellate division case turns out, but it's still pending.
Thank you for the update. Can you tell me which charter schools the students are going to? Besides the one that's here in New Brunswick, Greater Brunswick Charter School, are there others that are part of this?
There's about, there's about 6 charter schools that students go to. I don't know the exact breakdown off the top of my head, but there's Central Jersey Prep Charter School, and there's Greater Brunswick Charter School, of course. There's the Hactiva International Charter School. There is 3 others that escape me right now.
I can follow up.
Oh, the Robert Treat Academy, I believe, is one.
Okay.
And then there's 2 others that I don't remember what they are.
Thank you. And I did want to follow up on something I brought up at the last couple meetings, was a lease with, I guess it's the Holy Family Parish, which is under the Diocese of Metuchen. That's for a space at the Sacred Heart building. I just wanted to ask if there was any figure on what the annual rent is going to be that the district is going to pay, or what it has been in the past. It seemed unusual to me to extend the lease for so many years without having a figure in place. What's the figure that's been budgeted?
Well, we've been negotiating with the Diocese of Metuchen, but we're increasing the rental, this expansion to a larger portion. In fact, we're renting the whole school, which we never did before. So the annual expenditure will be about $600,000, which is about double what we used to pay, but we're getting significant, maybe 40% more of the building than we had.
Okay, and so is it fair to say that the motivation to expand was to keep charter school from opening up in that space?
Absolutely not. We were negotiating with an extension. We have needs for that. I'm not the educator, but I know that that was ongoing with the parish. So charter school apparently wanted to rent that facility, but they didn't tell us, they didn't tell, I guess, they didn't have a lease. I don't know what was going on here, but I know we were in active negotiations to extend the lease.
So it was coincidence, you wanted to expand the size, the amount of space you were renting.
Yeah, it wasn't a block like you said. It was our efforts that we needed more space.
Thank you. And just to be clear, what amount is budgeted to hold the annual school election in this budget?
$65,000.
Okay. And so I asked about this at the last meeting to see what it was, what the costs were, but I know last year we had to have 2 elections. So last year, did that $65,000 cover both?
No,
So it exceeded that last year.
it costs double.
Okay.
It was
Okay. Nevertheless, I think it is.
On a per voter basis, it was really exorbitant.
Okay. So does the district support having elections?
We're a non-political body. We're here to focus on the budget and the kids.
And then the last item I want to bring up, was there any accounting for the impact that these long-term tax exemptions have on the district's budget? I know there's been at least a couple dozen that are in play right now where some developers are making lots of profits and basically bypassing having to pay anything to the school district under this long-term tax exemption law. Is there any accounting for what impact that has on an annual basis?
This is just an annual budget, so we're just really focusing on what's going to happen next
I
year.
think Mr. General has an answer.
I have an
I
answer
think
for
it's
that,
time
Mr.
to
Brown.
answer.
Reg?
The redevelopment and what tax abatements they give, in my opinion, have no effect on our budget. We have an annual tax levy that we get from the taxpayers of the city of New Brunswick, okay? We, by law, can only increase that tax rate 2%. So if a new development was built tomorrow that brought in $600 million in tax revenue, we could still only get 2% above our $30 million that we get. So what effect that has is it affects the taxpayers and how much money it costs them on a yearly basis to fund the school district. So this tax abatement discussion really, I don't think is appropriate for us because we can only raise our taxes a certain amount every year anyway. And we make those decisions based on what our needs are. And based on those decisions, then that is translated into what that tax impact would be on the city of New Brunswick taxpayers. And this year, once again, we're proposing a less than $80 for the year for the taxpayers in New Brunswick, which we feel is a very low amount comparable to any other school district that you see in the state of New Jersey.
Okay, I appreciate the thorough answer. I'll just point out this year's increase you said was 1.66, correct?
1.66%.
Right, so if there were not as many tax abatements given out and those developers had to pay, like everyone else, 40% of their taxes to the school district, wouldn't the district be able to have a lower increase to the remaining taxpayers?
Well, if that development was never built, then they wouldn't have that additional tax revenue anyway. So no, I would say that that amount of money that they do get from that development makes this number do go down, because if that development is not here in town, they're getting no tax money from it.
And I have to say that having, what I learned as Deputy Commissioner of DCA, Charlie, we work with these things. The reality of the tax abatements is, would you rather have a building that generates significantly more tax than the previous building, even with the tax abatement, or would you rather have the old building with no tax abatement? So at the end of the day, it's really what net revenue is coming into the city is really all that matters. And so if you're generating more revenue because of this new facility, then it's a good opportunity for the residents of the city of New Brunswick. That's the bottom line, because it's all about ratables, which for those is just the taxes that come in. So if more taxes are coming in because of a building, that's good for the people. You can always say we should have 100%. I mean, again, but it's better than it was before, and that's the whole purpose of that with tax abatements and economic development.
I appreciate your position. I will just counter by saying that, you know, some cities have identified this as an issue, specifically because some of these buildings do create a demand for education. There's children living in the buildings. They have to be educated by the school system. So, for instance, Bayonne has passed a resolution that council decided that going forward, they're going to set aside 5% of every payment in lieu of taxes to go to the school system. And I don't see why our city council is not going to do the same, because these buildings do contribute to the school system. Has there been any accounting for how many children are attending schools from an address that's not paying school taxes?
Charlie, you know, again, that's a great example of Bayonne. New Brunswick's not Bayonne. So again, every city is, you know, I'll tell you, the 611 cities are very, very different. So again, that's speculation, and we really just want to get back to the budget. But I just think it warranted kind of explaining why tax abatements do exist. And so I appreciate your questions. Any other budget questions?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to ask if there was any accounting of how many children attend the schools from addresses that don't pay school taxes.
We're here to talk about the budget, not about an estimation of demographics. Yeah, and Rich, is it 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. And I apologize, Charlie. One of the things that I've asked for is that we're going to have a clock that beeps so we know 5 minutes. So I apologize. So we're at that 5 minute time.
Okay, well, I'll sit down. I'll take it to mean there was no accounting of how many children are attending the schools from addresses that don't pay
we didn't say that.
school
So
taxes.
thanks.
Well, if there was one, please tell me.
Thanks so much for your questions, Charlie.
All right, well, thank you, and I hope, you know, when you're doing this 5 minute time limit, that you don't count the time that you're speaking. I think that's the way the city council does it, that's the best practice, so.
Well, that's actually a great point, so we won't answer your questions.
So, I'm sorry, you won't answer the question?
Well, you said, in 5 minutes, we won't count that time, so we'll keep it there, so. Thanks a lot. Any other questions from the public? Not hearing none? We're gonna vote on the budget. No, we gotta vote on the budget. Right, we didn't, the resolution isn't the budget. Yeah,
Right,
Yeah,
and Mr. Ortiz motioned it.
yeah.
And who was the second?
Motion second.
And
The roll call.
Mrs. Sadowski. Mrs. Seawood. Mrs. Solis.
Yes.
Mr. Spencer. Ms. Varela. Mr. Ortiz. Dr. Caldwell.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Now we're going to go to the resolution. That's what I thought you were talking about, George, this resolution. So now, Resolution A. Is there a motion to accept Resolution A? Second? Mr. Sadowski, Varela.
Mrs.
motion.
Sadowski. Mrs. Seawood. Mrs. Solis. Mr. Spencer. Ms. Varela. Mr. Ortiz. Dr. Caldwell.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Is there a motion to adjourn? Second. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you all very much.